Hi everyone, it's Lauren, and today we're going to be talking about the best books, or the books that I think are the best, that I have read in the first half of 2017. I really enjoy doing these mid-year and end-of-year roundups of all of my favourite books because it's nice to look back at what I've read, what I've particularly enjoyed, and then also be able to recommend those to you as well. So the first thing, I've not got 5 books, I've got 6, plus an honorary mention, so I actually have 7. So we'll start with the honorary mention, which is Strange Heart Beating by Ellie Goldstone. Now the reason that this isn't actually an official favourite book of the year so far is that although I really loved her writing, I didn't quite feel that the overall plot and structure was quite there, quite put together. This is a debut novel though. It is about a man whose wife is killed by a swan, and then he's trying to, 1, deal with his grief, and 2, uncover parts of her former life in Latvia that he didn't really know about. So he goes to her hometown and meets some people that she knew there. Once he got to Latvia, I did start to get a little bit more uninterested in the plot, but as I say, this is much more about the writing, which is so delightful. It was just very funny, really sumptuous, and considering this is a debut novel, I feel like I needed to highlight Ellie Goldstone in this video because she's definitely one to watch for the future. On to the top 6. The first book that I wanted to mention is Sunshine, which is a poetry collection by Melissa Lee Holton. I do not read very much poetry. This was gifted to me by Jen Campbell for Christmas and I read it straight away in January, I think. This collection is such a visceral look at kind of the depths of inside the human brain, and I found it very interesting. It's very shocking, and not necessarily in a way that the subject matter is shocking, but it's shocking that someone can be that open and honest and candid about themselves, and you really feel like you're scraping inside of somebody's like deepest, darkest brain. Saying that I enjoyed this book doesn't really feel like the right word, because it's not exactly a kind of flowery skip through a wheat field or something, but it does ring so true, and it feels like she's really getting to the heart of something like really deep inside us. So if you want to try some poetry, I think I would recommend this. I definitely want to read the rest of her now, and I think that's very handy as someone who's not very into poetry. Finding a voice that I really enjoy reading means that I've got a couple of other of her collections to read now. She's also written Beautiful Girls and A Body Made of You. The next 2 that I have for you are short story collections, the first of these being Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue. Now this is a collection of fairy tale retellings, and the structure is like that of a Russian doll, so each tale kind of leads on to the next one. So for example, at the end of a Cinderella retelling, Cinderella might ask her fairy godmother, "Who were you before I knew you? What's your story?" And then the fairy godmother will tell her tale, which might be that of Snow White, and you sort of go back and back, and it's very much about the heroes and heroines mainly of the tales confronting the evil witches and the villains, and it's a very feminist leaning examination of what these women might have been and why, what would lead someone to be evil, what's their own story, and equally what would lead someone to be good. But it's not that heavy-handed really, it's just a very, very enjoyable read, and I completely whizzed through it because at the end of each tale you want to know what the next tale is, because you get a bit of an inkling as to what the next retelling is going to be about. I read it basically in a day, I think. And the other short story collection is Whatever Happened to Interracial Love by Kathleen Collins. Now these are short stories written by Kathleen Collins in the 60s and the 70s, but they were never published in her lifetime, so these have only recently been collected and collated and published in this collection. What I loved about this book is that the short stories are very much about race, about maybe liberal, left-leaning thinking, about a society changing and on the move, and young people kind of thinking about what the future might hold for them and for their future generations. And yet it felt so poignant and so relevant for today, and it made you feel like, how far have we moved on really? We've perhaps moved on in terms of what we think the world should be like, but is that world really there? And it's very interesting. Not only that though, this felt very, very modern, not just about the subject matter of the short stories, but the structure of them. They're very experimental, some of them. They're all done in very different styles. And yet they feel very modern. I feel like someone yesterday could have written these short stories. It doesn't feel dated or like she's following a set type of structure. So I would really recommend these, especially as she was someone who was underappreciated in her lifetime. So now on to my top 3 books of the year that I have read so far. First of these is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. This was shortlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction. It was also shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize last year, and with very good reason. It's a very ambitious novel, but I feel like she pulls everything off that she's trying to do. The main story arc looks back at family and connections between the generations. We start with a Canadian Chinese girl, Marie, whose mother takes in another young woman, Ai Ming, who's fleeing from the Tiananmen Square demonstrations in China, and Ai Ming explains to Marie how their families are connected. We go back through their grandparents' generation, their father's generation, and we see a sort of potted history of post-revolutionary China. And there's so much that she fits into this book. It's also about society, it's about families, it's about culture being handed down through the generations, it's about music, it's about mathematics, it's about Chinese characters and the poetry that there is in that, it's about storytelling, and it's about so much. And I don't feel like it feels too dense when you read this book. It's not the easiest of books to read, but once you get into it, or once I got into it, I felt completely swept up in it. And I think what's testament to this is that I did look up some more information about the Chinese Revolution and about some of the historical elements of this book, not because I felt like I had to in order to understand the story, but because I wanted to learn more about it. I was really interested, and I think she presents it in such a way that you could know absolutely nothing about China, about Chinese language, or about Chinese culture, and still really enjoy the book. The next book was a little bit of a surprise for me, actually, well, on finishing it anyway, and that is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. And I say surprise because when I started reading this book, to be honest, I found it a little bit difficult. I found it a bit of a slog, and I couldn't really connect with any of the characters. But as I continued reading it, my enjoyment of it just absolutely increased with every page. And by the end of it, it was one of my favourite books that I read like in recent times. This is about a woman called Cora whose husband dies, and she takes her son out to Essex, to Colchester, to start a new life. And she also hears tales of the fabled Essex Serpent, which it is said is come back and is running around the mud plains. This is at a time in history when people are just about discovering fossils and dinosaurs, and so Cora is very interested in that. She meets a local vicar and they develop a relationship. But there's so much in this book. It's about what happens when different belief systems are confronted with each other and questioned and attacked. It's about people's differing beliefs, but also when confronted with scientific fact. It's about mass hysteria. It's about obsession in all kinds of different small and also on large scales. And at its heart, I feel like the characters are very well written. I really got to know each and every one of them, and I felt like they were so believable in what they were doing. And it is historical fiction, but it doesn't feel like it's being too flowery or doing a nod to the period. It feels like a book which is in period, but it doesn't feel too old-fashioned. It doesn't feel too modern either, and the characters don't feel anachronistic in any way, and you just really buy this world that Sarah Perry has created. And yeah, I really liked it. The writing was especially beautiful, and this is something that I definitely think I want to reread at some point, just because it felt like just a very fun story and I was really enjoying it. But I know there was so much more in it, and I think I would definitely get a lot out of a second reading. And finally, my favourite book that I have read so far this year, I don't actually have a copy with me because I have lent it to my mum because I want everybody to read it because I just loved it so much, and that is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. It's about a Nigerian couple, Yejide and Akin, who are unable to have children, and therefore, Akin's family decide that it's time for him to take a second wife who will give him children when Yejide can't. But it's about so much. There are so many layers to this book as well. It's about love and loss and family, about culture, about storytelling. There's a lot of references to fables and fate and local fairy tales in this book. And although you might feel like you know where the story is going, especially due to the fairy tales that are used within this book, I feel like the story goes on so many twists and turns. And it's not that it's a mystery necessarily, but it's just that you can't predict which way it's going to go. And on top of that, it's just absolutely beautiful writing. I really, really enjoyed it. Considering that, again, this is a debut novel, I am just completely blown away. And I definitely, if this is her first book, I just wonder what is her second, what's her third, what's her fourth book going to be like. I really, really am a complete fan and convert to Ayobami's writing, and I would just recommend this to everybody. I think there's so much in it. I don't think there's a person that I wouldn't recommend it to. So those are my best ones so far. It'll be really interesting at the end of the year to see how many of these books are still on my best of list. In a way, I hope they are because I love them. In a way, I hope they're not, because then maybe that means I'm going to read a lot of really good stuff in the second part of the year. I would absolutely love to hear from you if you have read any of these books, and if not, I would like to hear what your favourite books are that you've read so far this year. Give me a couple more recommendations. I can never have too many books to read. So let's have a chat in the comments section, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!